Wow. That was old school racing at its finest, folks. That was some entertaining racing at Thunder Valley yesterday. Hey there, race fans. It's Race Day Top 5 with me, Frank 5. Bristol Motor Speedway, the last great coliseum of racing, Thunder Valley. It is one of the best tracks for any fan to attend, and it's the drivers that put on a phenomenal show. This weekend, we had a lot of stuff that happened that saw a very old school fashion NASCAR race in the modern era, and one of the sport's most polarizing drivers end up coming home in first place. Let's get into all that went down at Thunder Valley yesterday, shall we? Number 1, Hamlin conquers Bristol. Denny Hamlin, a man who has been very successful at Thunder Valley, captured his first win of the season, winning yesterday's Food City 500 on Bristol Motor Speedway, beating out teammate Martin Truex Jr., Brad Keselowski, Alex Bowman, and Kyle Larson, the top 5. By the way, did Denny Hamlin last fall mention that he beat everyone's favorite driver? Thankfully, he didn't say that this time, but he did end up beating everybody else in the field yesterday. Hamlin had such a good race car yesterday, running in the top 5 all day long, got up front, led some laps early, then he fell to the lower part of the top 5, top 10, and actually, a brief moment at the end of stage number 1, he made contact with the outside wall because his tires were falling apart. But he was able to stay off the wall and not have significant damage to his car and continue on throughout the rest of the race. He fell after that incident, fell to the top 15, but then he worked his way back up there and ran in the top 5 pretty much the rest of the race with all of his teammates surrounding him. Ty Gibbs, Christopher Bell, and as mentioned, Martin Truex Jr., the runner-up. Hamlin was able to manage his tires in the long run while there were other cars struggling, and that's a big topic we're going to get into a little bit. But Hamlin was able to manage his tires for a lot of those long runs, and then when that caution came out, his team continued to knock out those pit stops on pit road that got him the track position he needed and had him the lead for a little bit until his teammates decided to go up there and pass him and ruin their tires for a little bit. Then we got into that last long green flag run at the very end of the race with 121 flag laps that we had at the end of the race. Hamlin managed his tires better than anybody else on the racetrack aside from his teammate Truex. When his teammate Gibbs fell back from the lead, Hamlin was able to take it and pretty much stay in control of the race and manage the pace of the race. And when everybody started making their pit stops, he continued to put guys a lap or more down because everybody was just continuing to fall off after using up all their tires. Hamlin was able to make his pit stop, and he was able to keep the lead after the pits. But then he ran into some heavy lap traffic at the very end of the race for guys that were on those worn tires that they had just put on a couple laps prior because of how quickly they were degrading, and Martin Truex Jr. was able to take the lead from Hamlin, but then a couple laps later, when Truex was stuck behind a few more cars, Hamlin was able to take it back from him and run away with the victory. Even though it was under a second at the very end of the race, Truex gave it everything he had to try to catch the Denny Hamlin, but it wasn't enough, and Hamlin was able to pull through and get his first win of the season. And so far, this is a good win for him considering how their season's been so far. It's been average, shall we say, Ran up front in the Daytona 500, which you would expect from a guy like Denny Hamlin. Led some laps, but he got caught up in the big one at the very end of the race and kind of limped home with a damaged race car. Then in Atlanta the following week, had one of the fast cars, ran up at the front, led a lot of laps, but got caught up in an incident late in the race. Then we go to Las Vegas, had one of the best Toyotas out there, finished inside the top 10. And then Phoenix last week, won the pole, seemed to have one of the better cars at the beginning of the race. And the final stage, while going for the lead against Tyler Reddick in turns 1 and 2, the 11 car got loose on the inside and went around. Thankfully, he didn't hit anything, but it took him out of a chance to not only win the race, but a solid top 5 finish. They had to settle for 11th place, I'm pretty sure, because of the spin pinned him deep in the traffic. And he, like a few of the Toyotas that day, were the only ones that could really pass in traffic. But yesterday, he was able to dictate a lot of the pace of the race, especially with the tire management, and it ended up working to his favor as he gets his first win of the season. I guarantee you it is not going to be his only win of the season. Of course, Hamlin's still chasing that championship. He's won the 500, he's won the 600, he's won the Brickyard 400, he's won the Southern 500, he's won 3 night race at Bristol. This is his first time he won on the spring race at Bristol. He's never won in spring before, and this time he was able to get the job done. Can he win the championship this year? It's still a question we're all waiting to answer. We're going to find out come playoff time. But for now, Denny Hamlin, the 11 team, can celebrate a great win yesterday at Thunder Valley. Number 2, tire fall off and tire management. Folks, I have never seen anything like that. Well, maybe the Brickyard 400 from 2008, although that one was not a good look for NASCAR and Goodyear that day. This one, I think, was a little bit better look, depending on how you fancy your opinion from yesterday's race. Yesterday was the first race for the NASCAR Cup Series on the concrete surface in the springtime. The last 3 years we've run the spring race at Bristol, dating back to when we debuted the next-gen car in 2022, and the last year of the old car, we were running the race on dirt because it was raining all the time during the spring, and we wanted to maybe put a little bit of a spice into Bristol. Well, this time we went back to the concrete surface after the last 3 years the dirt race ran its course. And yesterday, we dropped the green flag, and there were a lot of guys going back and forth up at the front of the field. But another thing you saw yesterday, a lot of tire fall off on these guys. These guys had their hands full in practice and qualifying on Saturday, and it showed up yesterday in the race under the partly cloudy skies. Everybody was battling the tires they were running. I mean, you saw chunks and chunks and chunks of rubber up in the upper groove. Nobody could get in that high lane yesterday because you went up there, you would automatically hurt your tires because there was no grip. No rubber was being laid down to the racetrack yesterday because this track with the tire compound that we brought was acting like a cheese grater to these tires, and everybody had tire fall off. After about, you use them for the first 15, 20 laps, okay, but then about 30 to 40 laps into a run, the tires completely fall off, and either somebody falls off the pace completely by 2 to 3 seconds, or somebody blows a tire and goes around. I kind of felt like we knew what we were getting ourselves into yesterday when Tyler Reddick elected to stay out after the first caution on worn tires. Not even a full lap in, off of turn 4, he goes around into the pack. Thankfully, not a lot of cars clobbered him, but he did hit the inside wall and then get hit from the door by Zane Smith. And then after that, a couple other guys, when we got into those long stints, tire fall off. Kyle Busch had a couple tires go down, and he spun around twice, and both of them were in turn 2. As mentioned, Denny Hamlin, he had a tire go down, but thankfully kept it off the wall and didn't suffer any significant damage. Josh Berry and a couple of other cars had some fall-offs. Todd Gilliland, at the very end of the race, he was a moving chicane out there because of his tire wear and literally not being up to pace. This was a big, big thing that happened yesterday for a lot of these guys, taking it easy the first part of the run, not wanting to go overly aggressive, but some guys used the middle groove, which pretty much we could have called the high lane yesterday, the middle groove of the racetrack, to try to pass guys on the outside of them so they could get some of that track position and then go into conservative mode to save their tires and not burn them up until, while everybody else was beginning to fall off. But we didn't really have a whole complete 100-plus green flag lap run yesterday until the final laps of the race with about 121 laps to go. We went green the rest of the way. And we had green flag pit stops during that time. Even as guys' tires started falling off, everybody was able to come down pit road, make their pit stop in the middle of that last green flag run stint, and come in, get their tires on, and continue on throughout the rest of the race. Some of the guys obviously pitted later were able to benefit and pick up a few more spots at the very end, while those guys that pitted earlier had their tires fall off at the very end of the race. But what this racing did, even with the tire situation, it provided a very intriguing, very entertaining race yesterday. We had 54 lead changes in yesterday's race. That's the most lead changes on any short track. More than Martinsville, more than Richmond, more than North Wilkesboro, more than any short track we've ever been at. This race yesterday provided the most lead changes on a short track. And we had a couple of dominant drivers yesterday, but we had almost half the field leading this race yesterday. That's how entertaining this race was. And you could pass yesterday with this tire, and even with the fall off. You were able to pass guys up in the middle groove, on the bottom lane, when you got them up out of the high side because you wanted that bottom groove and hold your track position. There was a lot of passing yesterday, and I think the fans at the track, and a good crowd, by the way, for this weekend's race, with no rain implicating it whatsoever, and all the passing that we saw on the track, and fan watching from home, that was a lot of fun yesterday. I thoroughly enjoyed that. Now, one thing that Matt Weaver tweeted out on Twitter about the tire situation, he was talking to Goodyear's Greg Stucker, and Stucker says that tire wear is too drastic. Says it's because rubber is not laying down and they need to understand why. The only variable is resin instead of PJ1. Tire wear is good, but this is too much, Greg concedes. So basically what he was saying was there was a lot more tire wear than we would have expected yesterday, and we didn't put the PJ1 down. It was the sticky substance that we used to have a little bit of grip on the bottom for guys to run, while guys were usually, the last couple of years since we kind of reconfigured Bristol, guys have been running the top lane, and we wanted to put some grip back on the bottom to make there be 2 passing lanes. And that has worked for Bristol. But this time we didn't put the PJ1, we just put resin down. And I think that had a little bit of a factor to do with all the tire wear that we saw. But despite all that, I think even with the excessive tire wear, a lot of the drivers and the crew chiefs thoroughly enjoyed that race. Even the guys that got good results and the guys that didn't get good results. They thoroughly enjoyed that. They want to try to find a little bit of a balance, obviously, between the tire wear, because we want that for short tracks. But we don't want excessive tire wear like that yesterday. But it did put on a good show nonetheless. So even with the tire fall off, tire management, and the drivers being in control of their cars and managing their tires yesterday made for a very, very entertaining race at Thunder Valley. Number 3, Gibbs dominates but fades late. Ty Gibbs was the guy to beat yesterday. This kid has had a very good start to the season this year, averaging the best average finish of any driver so far this year. He had a great car last weekend at Phoenix, and it looked like he was going to get his first career win until he got passed by Christopher Bell late, and Bell was just took off because of how good his car was in long runs. Yesterday, when we had some of those long runs, about 30, 40, 50 laps before a caution came out, Ty Gibbs was the man to beat. His car was on rails. He swept both the stages 1 and 2, and it looked like he was going to be on his way to first career win. Another thing I want to point out, Gibbs had a penalty earlier in the race when a tire rolled into someone else's pit box in front of him. I think it was Kaz Grala of the 15 car, and Gibbs had to restart the tail in the field. They put worn out tires, some of geez Louise, one of them, they put on older tires that weren't completely covered with chunks and chunks of rubber with all the tire wear that we saw yesterday. They put on an old set of tires, and they were able to pass guys on the outside lane. Gibbs was so strong yesterday. It looked like he was going to get his first career win. But then his tires faded late in the part of that last green flag run, and eventually had a tire go down and took him completely out of contention for the win. He was able to rally and get a 9th place finish, but you also think, what could have been if he was able to manage his tires about as well as his teammates? The difference, I think, between a lot of these guys having the tire fall off yesterday and guys managing their tires, the guys that have a lot of experience with tire management were able to capitalize and get the good results. Hamlin the winner, Truex getting 2nd, and Keselowski with the 3rd place. A young guy like Ty Gibbs and even Christopher Bell pushed it to the limit, I think, at the beginning of that final green flag run before pit stops happened under green, and it caught them in a bad way, and they both faded, and they were not able to contend with their teammates for the race win yesterday. But despite that, Gibbs had speed yesterday. It is only a matter of time before this kid gets a win. They just have to execute when it matters most. Again, they had a strong car yesterday, but if they managed their tires about as well as their teammate Denny Hamlin and Martin Truex Jr. did, then they could have probably been contending for the win. But at the end of the day, it is what it is, and Gibbs walks away with a top 10 despite having perhaps the best car yesterday. Number 4, great day for Hendrick Motorsports. Well, all but one of their cars. William Byron had an incident earlier in the race where he hit the wall and was never a contender after that. But the rest of the Hendrick camp had a great day yesterday with a 4th place for Alex Bowman, a 5th place for Kyle Larson, and Chase Elliott gets his first top 10 of the season with an 8th place yesterday. Kicking off with Alex Bowman, he didn't qualify well. He was the lowest qualifying car of the Hendrick camp yesterday in 29th. But slowly, methodically, he was able to work his way inside the top 10, top 15, and hung around there for a lot of the race yesterday, just managing his tires and not pushing it to the limit. And then when we got into that last long green flag run, Bowman found himself inside the top 5, passing guys who were continuing to fade when their tires were dead. And Bowman was able to actually lead a couple laps during the sequence of green light pit stops and found himself inside the top 5 at the very end of the race as he kept passing a few more guys that had pitted before him, and he passed them when he had the fresher rubber versus everybody else that had faded. But a nice top 5 for Alex Bowman, because ever since his runner-up finish in the Daytona 500, which one could argue, people think he should have won, but again, the camera angle from the Goodyear Blend showed that Byron was the winner, so I know Bowman fans still upset about that. Bowman had not really had a lot of good luck for him lately. They had got up in that wreck at Atlanta and just ran around the rest of the day wounded. They had a top 10 run going to Vegas, but I don't know what happened on one of their pit stops, and they lost their drive position. And then last week at Phoenix, I mean, they were just hovering outside the top 10 all day, and they just stayed inside the top 20. Was not the best performance for Alex Bowman. This race yesterday was a much better performance, and hopefully it gets them some momentum going forward with some tracks upcoming where he's pretty good at road courses and a few more short tracks. Then we go to Kyle Larson, who every time we come to Bristol, aside from the other Kyle Busch, Larson is a guy you always got to watch because he's so good here. Now, he was not able to run the high line like he normally is accustomed to doing at Bristol yesterday because of what we were doing with the tires. But Larson had a good race car and seemed like he was one of the few cars that could keep up with the Toyotas yesterday who were managing their tires. Larson had a good car at the beginning and just kind of hung around the top 10 for a lot of the second stage. And the start of the final stage, it looked like he was setting himself up with a strong chance to contend with those Toyotas. But on the pit stop of the last caution of the race, Larson got caught for equipment interference. And it was the same penalty that hurt Ty Gibbs early in the race. Larson fell deep in the pack, and it looked like that's it. He's not going to be able to contend for the race win, which he wasn't. But he was one of the few cars that were able to pit early, and he was one of the few that was able to actually manage the tires on the long run after everybody made their green flag pit stop during the race yesterday and walked out of there with a 5th place finish. That's a really good job by the 5 team overcoming adversity late in the race where it looked like they were out of contention for a solid result. They ended up getting a top 5 yesterday. And then we go to Chase Elliott, who finally gets his first top 10 of the season, coming off one of the worst seasons of his professional career where he broke his leg, missed 6 races, and then got suspended for a retaliation incident at the Coke 600 that took out Denny Hamlin. He ultimately didn't win a race and did not make the playoffs. To start off the season, he won the opening stage of the year at the Daytona 500 and came out there with a 14th place finish. And then finished in 15th the next weekend at Atlanta with a kind of wounded race car from being part of that big lap 1 wreck. Then we go to Las Vegas. He looked like he was going to get a top 10, but then we had a caution late, and his car wasn't good on short runs, and he faded. And then at Phoenix last week, he ran top 5 all the early part of that race, but then when he fell deep in the pack when other cars were taking strategies to get track position, he never regained that track position and ended up finishing 19th. Yesterday, he qualified well, ran up front, led a couple laps, and by the way, gave Hendrick Motorsports 80,000 career laps led in the Cup Series yesterday. I mean, Larson led a few more after that, but Elliott was the one that helped Mr. H reach 80,000 laps led for the team in the Cup Series. That's an impressive landmark for Hendrick Motorsports. Elliott led a couple laps. Then he developed a little bit of voltage issue, saying that the volts were down to 12.8. But it didn't seem to hurt him the rest of the race because he kept running on the lead lap. Nearly fell a lap down until Josh Berry went around on the backstretch. Elliott just kind of hung around the top 20 for the rest of that race. But then as other drivers' tires began to fade, Elliott picked his way back up to the field, and at the end of the day, he walks out there with an 8th place finish, which is a good result to get him some momentum going forward for these upcoming tracks that he's been pretty good at in the past, like Circuit of the Americas, won the inaugural race there 3 years ago. Richmond, he's been kind of hit or miss there. If he has once he doesn't have a good car, the next time he does have a good car. So let's see what happens this time. And then Martinsville, where he's been very good at in the past. So hopefully this top 10 is a good result going forward. They'll hopefully get Chase Elliott back up there, and we'll hopefully be seeing him in victory lane soon. But a nice day for the Hendrick camp yesterday. Despite one of their drivers not doing so well, the other 3 got out there with top 10s. And number 5, JHN, John Hunter Nemechek, in the top 10. One of the drivers that we talked about at the beginning of this year that are coming back to the Cup Series after having a couple seasons in the Xfinity Truck Series competing for race wins and championships was John Hunter Nemechek. He got signed by Legacy Motor Club to drive for their number 42 car that was switching to Toyota in the offseason to try to improve the race team and get them up towards the front and competing up with the big dogs. Nemechek started the season with a top 10 in the Daytona 500. Then they were, again, caught up in the wreck in Atlanta. They ran well at Vegas, but faded late. And then they struggled last weekend in Phoenix. And, of course, he was the center of controversy, getting to the back of Joey Logano in turn 1 and turning Logano around and causing a wreck. And Nemechek owned up to that, saying, it's my fault. I apologize. Tell him I'm sorry. Yesterday, he had one of his best runs of the season. He ran in the top 10 and part of the top 5 a lot of yesterday. He did a great job managing his track position and managing his tires and came out of there with a nice 6th place result. It looked like for a moment he could have gotten the top 5, but some of those guys coming from behind like Bowman had better tires than him and just overhauled him. But a nice 6th place result for Nemechek, who's so far this year, I would say he's doing a fairly good job. Legacy Motor Club, again, trying to be better as a race team and try to running up front with the likes of Hendrick and Penske and Gibbs and Stuart Haas and Richard Childress Racing and all those other teams and RFK. They did a really good job yesterday, the 42 cam. His teammate Eric Jones at times ran the top 10, but he faded late on those tires. But Nemechek did a great job yesterday. And right now, as the playoff standings goes, Nemechek would actually make the playoffs right now. Next to last spot, actually. We still have a ways to go, but if he could at least see a little bit of consistency with this team going forward, they could be pretty good down the stretch. So a nice job by John Hunter Nemechek and the 42 team yesterday. And a quick shout out, by the way, to Josh Berry yesterday, who seemed like he was one of the drivers that put on a show yesterday. He was one of the guys on the radio that said, "Man, I love this bleep." You could probably guess what he said there. He loved the tire fall off yesterday and all these guys slipping and sliding around, just managing and trying to get the best they can out of the car before the tires fade late. He loved it. I mean, it reminded him of his late model days and, watching those cars on the short tracks battle out and see the tire fall off. He said he had a ball out there. He was the reason for 2 cautions yesterday, but he did a good job nonetheless and brought home his best result of the season, a 12th place finish. Wish he could have gotten top 10 or top 5 because he was up there at the very end of the race, but he was one of the guys, again, that pitted early during that green flag stint, and it kind of cost him a top 10 result, finishing 12th. But a good result for him in that 4 team. And then he had his 2 teammates behind him in 13th and 14th in Briscoe and Priest. So a pretty decent day for the Storehouse camp, and Josh Berry definitely was one of the stars that put on a good show yesterday. Now we're off to some road course racing for the first time this year. Next weekend, we are headed to Circuit of the Americas in Austin, Texas, where the last couple of years, this racetrack has definitely been an interesting one. Racing in the rain the first year. First year, the next-gen car, we had a chaotic finish at the end. And last year, we kept having restart after restart after restart because everybody kept crashing at the top of the hill. Hopefully this time, we're going to have a little bit of a tamer race. I think they're going to put the restart box before we get to the final corner coming off into the main straightaway and then taking the green flag. I hope that's what we're doing. And hopefully there's not a lot of chaos at the top of the hill when we go up there with everybody beating and banging into each other. But also, want to quickly point out that we'll be running the short track package for this road course next weekend, which will be very interesting to see how the racing goes. And stage break cautions will be implemented on road courses again. I know a lot of people are not happy about that, but and a lot of people thought that the Indianapolis and the Watkins Glen races last year were one of the main reasons why, we kind of needed them back. So let's see what happens. Maybe the positioning of the restart box at COTA will make for a better show this time. So will Chase Elliott regain his road course dominance with a victory next week? Will AJ Allmendinger, who's coming in a third colleague car, spoil the party? Or will we have another finish like 2022 and maybe Ross Chastain comes down the good end? Or will Denny Hamlin go back-to-back to start the season and be our first repeat winner? We shall see. It'll be a lot of fun next weekend, and I can't wait. So hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and hope you all had a wonderful St. Patrick's Day weekend, celebrating the holiday and having good times at the pubs and bars and everything. Subscribe, like. Congrats once again to Denny Hamlin, the 11th team on their win, and what was a thrilling, entertaining race at Bristol yesterday. Have a great week, everybody. Let's go racing!